So let's go ahead and get started and maybe give your name and what company you're with and the sort of thing that your company is good at.
Good. So hey everyone, I'm Thibault, working at Cloudflare, operating Cloudflare public IPFS gateway as well as like dedicated gateways for people, providing X509 certificate to all of them. As part of that, we're also leveraging Cloudflare existing infrastructure, should be for like WAF, security, DDoS, analytics, workers, or zero trust.
My name is Matt Ober. I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO of Pinata. Pinata is one of the earliest pinning services that's been existing for a while, and we basically just do Web3 media storage built on IPFS. So we store your data, we serve it through gateways. A lot of other stuff at play there, but those are kind of the two big factors.
And I'm Mario Camou. I work for Protocol Labs. I take care of our gateways, and we're basically providing these as a public gateways as a public service for the internet. So, who wants to start?
Is this a question? Do we just talk between each other, or are you asking us questions?
So this is a question for Cloudflare. I was interested in what you guys are doing with IPFS. Like, how are you running it, and what are your plans for the gateway?
So for IPFS, we started in 2018, I think, and kind of started as like just research project. Like we're interested in like these new emerging paradigm for like distributed networks and like how people would use them. And so as part of the research team, we like just were tasked to start an IPFS gateway and have it as a public good in a similar way that we run like our DNS or run like various services, certificate transparency, or etc., and just see what happens. It turns out that there was a lot more usage than what we expected initially. And so like recently, like earlier this year, we transitioned like this gateway from like a public good and like research project to keep the research project, but at the same time also offer like gateways for people that would like to like have actual SLAs, have a support, be able to like customize the headers or I don't know, various settings of their gateway. In terms of going forward, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so I think all these guys are also doing super interesting things. In terms of going forward, the HTTP gateways are definitely a good way to interact with the IPFS ecosystem. At the same time, there's a lot of difficulty in terms of like carrying the trust and cryptography that like IPFS benefit from in terms of verifiability to an HTTP world. And so definitely working on standards and etc. to like improve this is definitely important for us. And I think IPFS.io is also doing a lot to that extent with like car files. So I'll pass the mic to Mario.
Yeah, well, like I said, I mean, we IPFS.io, we've been running the gateway since forever, I guess. I mean, I've been with PL only for a little bit less than a year, so I haven't know the whole history of the gateways. But yeah, like I said, I mean, we're providing that as a public service. The idea is that there needs to be some way of bridging between the Web 2 and the Web 3 worlds, and we want to ensure that there's at least one way that is completely free and open. Modulo takedown requests, modulo malware blocking, modulo that sort of thing. And basically that's why we are keeping the gateways up and running. What's the thing with Pinata?
I guess on the subject of gateways, we do operate a dedicated gateway service. I talked about this a little bit in an earlier talk today, but similarly to you guys, operating these public free goods, we do that as well through our public gateway. But it does get crazy. So if you do want something that's more in line with performance, speed, but also protections against things like phishing, malware, DDoS, right? We kind of offer that up all packaged together. And think of us as kind of like a fully integrated stack. So you pin your content to us, and you can also serve it through a gateway. It's all kind of just one unified experience. So That's really what we focus on, is just user experience. It's a big part of what makes us a Pinata. I think we diverged a little bit from your original question, but any other questions we have out here in the audience right now?
Hey, this is Jesse. I think I look at a lot of people running the public gateway. It's really free. I figure out like anything you want protocol lab to help, like maybe incentive program or something like that can help more people on the public gateway. Any suggestion or anything you feel like super important for the people running the gateway for free? Can you like share with us?
Okay, maybe I'll take it. So yeah, I mean, definitely these gateways are free in a way that, like, I mean, should be Pinata or like Cloudflare offering some gateway for free. And at least for Cloudflare, it's also as part of like good of the internet. Like you would like to be able to access these services for free. Of course, it's not because the service is free that like you should be able to like, you know, page someone with an issue, or like you should be able to like just expect, have the same expectation as a like paid service. At the same time, similar to, and I would really take like a normal traditional web infrastructure approach, but like similar to like Cloudflare, like who is operating like a free DNS server like 111, or who's operating certificate transparency, like all these are free services. And just because like Cloudflare thinks it's good for the internet to have these kind of like free services and public good, at the same time, it also gives you kind of a good view and like diverse view about like what's happening. And so that helps you improve the paying services. So like the issues you would encounter through the public service, you won't have them through the paid service later on.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of good points here. In addition to public service, right? These gateways, they kind of act as like a call it a free trial to the distributed ecosystem here. A lot of times, these gateways are going to have to be built into whatever company is running them, just built into their business model. So whatever that looks like is kind of up to the company doing that. I know Cloudflare, Pinata, IPFS.io, we've all kind of taken a little bit of a different approach here. And that just depends on kind of like what the company's goals are, how it fits into their business model, and then kind of you know, what services they want to give a little bit of a free taste to the general public. Yeah.
Yeah, well, PL, one thing, talking about PL. Yeah, I mean, I think that right now, I mean, for us right now, I mean, the hardest thing is actually scaling up. Just basically, that's what kind of, you know, could keep me up at night, in the sense that we are basically dealing with an unbounded amount of traffic with a limited amount of servers. And that's what I think would be the toughest thing, or I don't know. I'm really waiting for Saturn to come along, to be honest, because that will take off a lot of the load. But I mean, it's on the one hand, I do think it's a bit ridiculous that we had to scale up to 120 Kubo nodes just to keep our gateways running. I'm not sure how many nodes you guys have. I don't. Where am I going? I don't even know where I'm going with this rant. I guess I'm just venting a little bit. But actually, I think that might be a good discussion point. What keeps you guys up at night?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll go back to the previous talk I did today. You know, the big thing that keeps us up at night is not necessarily the load of the gateways. Like I said, you know, we've kind of adapted that to fit into Pinata's growth trajectory as a whole. We want to make sure it's a service we provide to the world, but we want to make sure we're kind of doing that in a responsible way. And then, speaking of responsible, right? A lot of people don't use gateways responsibly. So think, again, malware, phishing detection, illegal content, that covers a wide breadth of things. But people use these gateways as kind of like a free CDN to serve whatever the content they want. And then when the ISPs get mad, they look at your domain, not the person who initially uploaded the content. So this is kind of an ongoing fight we have at Pinata, and something that we're developing a lot of like resources towards. So it doesn't necessarily keep us up at night, but it's something that we're like putting a lot of thought and effort into, as to how do we make sure that these bad actors don't take down just us, but like poison the well of the entire IPFS ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, I'd probably react to like an earlier point that you made about like the number of Kubo nodes and etc. And it's kind of like, I think there's been like a different paradigm in terms of like running a Kubo node, which like really was designed as something you could easily run on your computer to serve needs of like a gateway and like just web scale. And so like when you mentioned Saturn, for instance, it's definitely like one implementation that like has been thought differently, not something that like you would run locally, but like something that has been made to scale and made different trade-off. And that's one of the things we've seen also internally, is like from the beginning we relied on some of like the work that like the Go IPFS and now Kubo team did, but like the nodes were designed differently because we had different trade-offs. And it's in a way similar to like a lot of like in the Web3, like across like the Web3 space, we have like on a Go Ethereum that like also had like a similar design. You have like a node that you run locally that you're able to suit the need of users, but that likely doesn't suit and scale as you want to run a public service at web scale. So I think as time will like pass, there would be more, hopefully, like there are more implementation in details that are just slightly beyond just like Kubo and one node size, but more in terms of like how do you scale all these.
I've actually been quite excited this week to see things like the Elastic IPFS provider, IRO, we're basically doing completely different things from what Kubo is doing. I mean, Kubo, yes, it's one implementation, and it's getting better. I mean, I don't know if you guys have tried 0.16, but it's a lot better than than the previous versions, at least in resource management. But I mean, seeing that, yeah, well, we'll just use cloud providers to provide Kubo. Why not? To provide IPFS content, like Elastic Provider is doing. Use a microservices-like approach, like Arrow is doing. It's really, to me, it's really refreshing to see this sort of movement in the IPFS space. So, I don't know. Any more questions from the audience or comments?
What are some of the changes that you have to make on top of base Kubo to make the system work in your own system?
So the first thing, like first, when we started, like when the project of like running an IPFS gateway was pitched, just at Cloudflare, the first thing the legal team said, you need content moderation. So like that was the first thing, and yeah, I think like Matt like mentioned that like later on, that like yes, like that's a need when you need to operate a service, just to be able to like answer like legal requirement that like you may have through time, and I think like another different approach to like to the native Kubo is like how do you make sure when you have like multiple nodes or etc. that like you're not requesting content to the DHT like an infinite number of times, that like you can share like the resources, that like your content would be like more cacheable and just like improve time to retrieval, which might be slightly different for like pinning providers which have the content inherently. But
yeah, speaking of that, so we kind of do have a benefit on our end of being like a full stack implementation. Some of the things we've done on our end, specifically with how it relates to our nodes and our gateways, anything that's pinned on Pinata, when it's requested through one of our gateways, we know that it's pinned to us. We actually don't even request it via like the DHT. we just go directly to the node that has it and get it back, and we call that smart routing. So this is kind of like a big benefit that alleviates a lot of resource load and also improves speed for the customer, which is, you know, a huge win for them. Specifically, like fine tuning Kubo, there's a setting that Adine, one of the developers on Kubo, added a while back. It's like the internal configurations. You can change the amount of workers, the amount of tasks that are running in parallel. That helped us scale up a lot. So if you haven't checked that out for your own Kubo nodes, it's a big win there. There's so many little like fine-tuned things you can do in Kubo that will make your life easier, but it kind of just trial and error based on what you're seeing.
Plus, a lot of that isn't very discoverable in the documentation. Let's just say that. I mean, even things like the accelerated DHT client, in the case that you are actually looking at the DHT, like in our case, right? Things like that. One thing that we have introduced in Protocol Labs internally is what we call the Thunderdome, which is basically multiple Kubo implementations go in, only one will go out, or at least only one will outperform all the others. You might have seen some of the talks about, I think Ian talked about Thunderdome at some point. And we are actually starting to benchmark Kubo versions against each other and also Kubo configurations. And that should help a lot with that sort of thing, with finding out optimum configurations for something that is not the standard way of using Kubo as in start it up in your laptop, right? But that's going to take some time to actually be able to get some insights from it.
Is this thing, yeah. So when it comes to like, I guess, I mean, it's part of content moderation, but like with IPFS being a decentralized service and like running a gateway kind of being counter to that because you can filter out a lot of the stuff, like what are you guys doing in terms of like governance to make sure that like the stuff that you're filtering out is just like illegal?
Well, like I mentioned earlier in my talk, we have, I mean, in our case at least, we have the any takedown requests that arrive at abuse@ipfs.io. Yes, we automatically generate a PR, a pull request for any CIDs that are mentioned there, but then it goes to review through our legal department, and they are the ones that actually do the merge. So yeah, the legal department is the one that says, yeah, this is illegal. Is this a legal takedown request or not? That might be, there might be more that should be done at some point. But right now, at this point, that's the way that is what we're doing. The legal department is doing due diligence. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, on our end, it's kind of a mix of a lot of things. One thing I'll say though, kind of on our end, right, is like we don't want to block your content, right? But we are a company that resides in, a plot of land that is governed by a government, right? If we don't comply with certain laws, we get taken offline, which means that everybody's content gets taken offline, which is what we consider a far worse thing. The beautiful thing about IPFS here, right, is you can use the protocol under the hood to get whatever content you want, and that is a very powerful primitive. But at the end of the day, right, when things are associated with a company's domain name, you have to be very protective of that, or else it can impact everybody. And that is a trade-off, and it may not be for everybody. And that is kind of what you as a user choose on your scale of decentralization, like kind of what trade-offs are you wanting to make, what's more valuable to you, and make the right choice for you and your users. On our end, kind of how we determine, what we're blocking, it is all legal on our end, right? We don't take anything down if it's like, I'm offended by that content, right? We don't take stances there. It's DMCA content, right? It's phishing content. And a lot of the phishing content, we don't even get takedown requests for. It's if if our systems automatically detect it and we notice, hey, you're, let's say, a fake Microsoft page, right? That's pretty obvious. So that's more of a preventative measure, but it is all content that is going to get us legally in trouble. We take no stances on politics, anything like that. It's purely what we are legally obligated to take down. So.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Like, Cloudflare has a legal team. They have the tools to, like, content and like filter the content that has to be moderated for various reasons. And from a technical perspective, we give them the tool and they deal with it.
Actually, you bring up a pretty good point, right? I mean, it's not that we want to take the content down. The content is there, and if you run your own IPFS node, you can still get it. It's just that for legal reasons, you have to do it. Otherwise, it's not just the government that takes you down, it's ISPs that take you down. I mean, take an example. I live in Spain, and with the Catalonia process, with the Catalonia protests some years ago, the ISPs actually blocked IPFS.io. Why? Because the Catalonia, the people who weren't doing the Catalonia protests, were actually using IPFS to communicate with each other. So we had to do PL had to take down that content. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been, the gateways wouldn't have been reachable from Spain. None of the gateways, and we are still having problems with some ISPs that are still blocking us using SSL injection. They're basically changing the SSL certificate, and they do not, for some ISPs, you cannot get to the gateway just because at some point there was some content that was deemed illegal by the Spanish government or by the ISP, and they blocked it. So, and the problem is that it's not just that they are blocking that content, they are blocking everything under IPFS.io. So you have to tread a very thin line there. You have to be very careful. I hope that answers your question.
Sorry. I have a question related to what you guys mentioned about Saturn, and it's about content delivery. There's problems about retrieving data on IPFS. So do you think that the problem is maybe adding up a compute layer, so it's faster to retrieve that data, or to kind of cache mostly any possible, part of the IPFS data?
So you're saying, okay, let me see if I'm understanding your question correctly. So you're talking about the problems with accessing data on the IPFS network in general?
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
And content delivery of that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, accessing the data through the DHT, I mean, sometimes it's simply slow because of the way the DHT works, or because, I mean, it could also be because it's slow because the data that you want is on somebody's laptop that is on the slow end of a 33.6K modem, right?
Yeah, that's the point I want to, I don't know if maybe you can explain or something, because then we need a compute power or kind of a compute layer to just not simply use IPFS as a storage to kind of serve that data faster?
Well, the thing is, the bits have to get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
The bits themselves. And it doesn't matter how much compute you have. If your bandwidth is slow and you have to transfer X amount of bits, then it will take Y amount of seconds minimum. Just because, I mean, if you're on a 1 megabit line, or say, let's just to make it easier, 1 megabyte per second. Say your line gives you one megabyte per second. If you want to transfer 10 megabytes, you will take at the very least 10 seconds, plus protocol overhead. So if you're on a slow line, it doesn't matter if you have compute or not. If this line is slow, then the line is slow. On top of that, protocols themselves are slow or slower or faster. BitSwap is not necessarily the most efficient protocol out there. I don't know if you guys will agree with me that BitSwap is not precisely the most efficient. Well, there was a talk in one of the other tracks. I mean, one of the problems with BitSwap is that it's with IPLD is that it's kind of layered in the sense that if you have a huge file, you have a huge number of blocks, and they are kind of assembled in a tree structure. And the problem is you have to get the first block. Once you get the first block, you can see that what other blocks you need at the next level. Once you get a block on the next level, then you go to the next level. And those are round trip times. Those are round trips. So if you go on the internet, round trips will kill you. Round trips are what take over, because you cannot parallelize too much. So the protocol itself has these disadvantages, which is one of the reasons why they came up with GraphSync for Filecoin. It's kind of, yeah, we learned all of this stuff from BitSwap. Let's do something completely different. But still, if you're on a slow line, then you're on the slow line, and compute will not help you there, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was my question.
Sorry, I don't know if you guys want to address any more of that question. I kind of monopolized the microphone.
I'll say one thing. So one thing to kind of keep in mind here too is we're still growing, right? We're still improving. The amount of improvement that IPFS has seen in 3 years since the last IPFS camp. I don't know if you saw the slides in the very opening keynote. It went from like 50 seconds to like, under a second, right? That's huge gains. Same kind of thing now as you're starting to see this with the transport protocols. He mentioned, GraphSync. I was in conversations the other night with somebody that was like, we can do BitSwap better. I have ideas for this. And there was like 3 ideas that were brought up. So, people like that and people like you have the opportunity to influence these protocols right now and truly change them. It's not too late, right? We're still very early and there's a lot of gains that can be made. So Cambrian explosion, I think, is the term we've been using a lot this week. Oh, okay. You have a question or are you just touching your chin? Okay, cool. Any other questions we got here?
Well, I know that Pinata was taken completely offline, and Mario just said that IPFS.io has been taken offline by, not blocking content. I wonder, is that the most? What other outrageous things might have happened related to content moderation?
I mean, that's pretty much as bad as you can get. It's kind of hard to compare from being wiped off the internet. It's hard to say. That's probably, I don't really have anything that's worse than that, to be honest, off the top of my head. I'm just rambling at this point.
So Cloudflare basically took that straight off. It seemed like you guys tackled that right when you were starting to implement IPFS gateways at Cloudflare.
Yeah, because of running a web infrastructure for some years now, that's definitely issues that have been encountered and lessons we could take from the building the web infrastructure that we have and taking it as we're building the IPFS gateway, having the same lessons. We knew that matching the ability for a government to have their own law on their own territory is important, especially for these problems. And so as part of building the IPFS gateway, that's one of the first things that has been done. We had requests over time, if you send an email or just contact Cloudflare for a DCMA or a legitimate abuse request, the legal team go through that, make sure it's legitimate and acts consequently.
Did you say each country has its own law applied? Because I think that's different than what, at least that's different than what we do on IPFS.
Yes. So the internet is a worldwide system, but each country has its own border and its own right in terms of what should be its own laws in terms of what content is allowed, what content is not allowed. Maybe there's some great line in the middle, and so definitely each country should be sovereign in their way of deciding. Cloudflare would have a different approach depending on the country.
I guess Yeah, last question for me. And what, I guess, what would make it easier? What's the biggest pain point using Kubo that, I don't know, you wish would be different?
So if I start, I think Kubo as it is just working. Like when I use Kubo locally, it works. So I think Kubo inherently should not try to like be optimized for like gateway and like web scale providers. There are other implementations like could do that better and like would make different trade-offs. That doesn't mean that like what is being learned like at the web scale cannot be improved and like improve every user performance. At the same time, I really think it's like two different worlds. If we take on like the indexes, for instance, that like should improve content routing, that's something that came because of like gateway scale is just too much for like one Kubo node to handle and like every time query the DHT. So like you have an indexer, you just make one HTTP request and you get content discovery just in one request instead of like, I don't know, thousands of bit swap, not counting for the DHT. And that's something that Kubo node would benefit. And overall, I think it's okay to have two or like more different implementations that would do multiple trade-offs.
Yeah, I think you kind of said it really well. Kubo's really old. I mean, it's like 2014, I think, is when it first came out. And it's just kind of hard to, this is just software in general. It's tech debt, right? It's a lot easier to start fresh and build purpose-driven than it is to kind of like steer a cruise ship. So Kubo does a lot of things that are really good, and it's been a very valuable kind of like jumpstart for the ecosystem. But there's a reason we're talking about it right now and calling it Kubo and not Go IPFS. It's because we wanted, well, not we, but like the general IPFS ecosystem, right, determined that it was beneficial to not have only one Go IPFS implementation. If you want to make a different one that's written in Go, you can do that, right? It's not that every implementation needs to do everything. It can be purpose-built. So we've talked about things like Elastic this week. We've talked about things like IRO. These are purpose-driven IPFS implementations that are either written like in Rust for hyperscalability or cloud native such as Elastic. They're solving different things, and I think that's important to keep in mind. So like Kubo, it works with your local file system. It does all sorts of crazy things, right? You may not need that at cloud scale. You may just want to do pinning and service. So, yeah, I'm very thankful to Kubo, but I don't want Kubo to have to do everything.
Yeah, I think that we sometimes lose track of. I'm going to wax a little bit philosophical here, but I think we sometimes lose track of the name of the company and the name of the network. It's Protocol Labs. What does that mean? The important thing is not Kubo. The important thing is that there's a protocol, meaning that there can be IRO, there can be JS IPFS, there can be Elastic IPFS, and as long as they can all talk to each other, everything's fine. And yes, let's not try to make a kitchen sink that just, it's a floor wax and it's also a dessert syrup. Let's not try to do that. I think that IRO is Elastic IPFS. Mini IPFS, is it IPFS Tiny, I think, or IPFS Mini is also another tiny implementation for embedded devices. IPFS Embed. I mean, it's wonderful that there are different implementations for different purposes. I mean, in my previous job, we actually were using Go IPFS as an embedded system until we actually went with IPFS Embed inside a Rust binary. And it was so much better. So yeah, I mean, the important thing is the protocols that are there and that they will enable multiple implementations for different things. So I'm all for having all the implementations out there.
You touched on a really good thing here, kind of like jumping into the individual implementations themselves. One thing that you may notice if you're going through like the open source code, this is all open source for say like Kubo, JS, or even like Iro or Elastic, right? Like everything's open source here. These implementations of IPFS you'll find under the hood are built on tons of little reusable modules that you can swap in and out. So JS IPFS, right, is tons of these little NPM libraries are being used in Elastic IPFS right now because, well, they do a great thing. They work with CIDs, they translate, right? Like, same thing with Go, right? I mean, you can break these little things out and plug them and play them into your own implementation if you want to do something better. So there's a lot of opportunity there for improvements.
And I also had like one thing on that is like when I have like specs for IPFS, which was not the case at the start of the year, and definitely that really helps improve to like inform like how do we do the implementation, what do we test against, what's actually like a reference. Before, like if you wanted to do an implementation, you had to go like through like Go IPFS code, through JS IPFS code, to bug people on Slack just to try to see what was actually the thing you needed to implement. So the fact that you have specs is also really helpful through that.
Well, thanks, guys, and thanks to the audience. Sorry. Yeah, this has been the IPFS service panel.